We are honored to be joined by Rosemary Steinbaum, who is a trustee of the Newark Public Library. And by the way, I put my glasses on because we are doing a literary segment, and I have the illusion that it makes me appear smarter or more literary. Hey, listen, what room are you in right now?
I'm sitting in the Philip Roth personal library at the Newark Public Library on Washington Street in the great city of Newark.
All right. Let everyone know, by the way, I just showed everyone, I went into my library to get all my Philip Roth books, right? You see them here, right? Except my favorite, Goodbye Columbus and Portnoy's Complaint. We talked about that before. What does Philip Roth have to do with Newark, and why is he part of our, quote, New Jersey leaders who matter, whether they're with us or gone to another place? Why is he so important to Newark, New Jersey, and the nation and the world?
Well, he wrote about 30 novels. Many of them are set in Newark, as you well know. Many in the old Jewish neighborhood, but in settings throughout the city, in the old Italian North Ward and throughout the city. He's an important novelist of the second half of the 20th century and the first part of the 21st century, partly because of the vigor of his narrative voice, because of the ways he uses and shifts narration in his novels, which becomes kind of a primer on how to read great novels. His sense of place, whether it's Newark or anywhere else in the world, is pitch perfect. And he offers interesting insights into the historic events of his era. And I think that those portals make him an important writer.
So Roth died in 2018, correct?
Correct.
To what degree do you believe Philip Roth understood how important he was and continues to be for so many Newarkers, not those who just happen to be Jewish and from the neighborhood he came from, but to so many of us connected to Newark? And frankly, he spoke for so many in the city, particularly of a certain time. Do you think he understood his importance?
I do. He wanted his library here. The last thing in the world he wanted was a shrine in upstate Connecticut where he lived. He wanted to return to Newark, and not only because of his own personal affiliation with the library in the city, but because of just what you said, Steve, because he's important to so many people in and around Newark. We have visitors to this space who fly in from Chicago through Newark Airport and detour to see the Roth Library.
You know, I want to. You saw this in the New York Times, the New York Times Book Review,
yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And this is what got my attention. And I'm not going to get into the whole thing about the author of this, Philip Roth, the biography by Blake Bailey. I'm not going to get into the Blake Bailey thing. But I am going to ask you, as I read this and then got the book, Roth controversial from your perspective?
Sure.
And I don't want to assume your answer is a large part of what was controversial about Philip Roth, his, quote, relationship with women and how he wrote about them?
Well, that's been a huge area of investigation. Roth was an extremely complex person. And because of how he wrote and because of people's interest in the author behind the writing, a lot of his complexity was just out there in the public sphere for conversation. I too don't want to parse the question of misogyny, but it's out there as a question. I knew Roth. I knew him well.
You did?
Yes.
How?
And I can tell you he was not a misogynist, and I could go on about that for too long.
No, but what personally, so you interacted with him on a whole range of situations, circumstances over several years, correct?
Correct.
How would you describe his personality, not his writing, but his personality with you?
He was always entirely gracious, very, very funny, completely present. There wasn't a half a line that could get by him. When you talk to Roth, he'd listen to you utterly, and you better be listening to him just as carefully.
Wow, do you make me wish, Rosemary, that I had a chance to, over these 30 years of doing this, to sit down with Philip Roth, to be obsessed by him, to read about him, to read his work. Forget about me, but more importantly, put in perspective the library you're in and how unique it is. There's not a whole bunch of Philip Roth libraries all over the place.
I don't think there are a whole bunch of libraries dedicated to the reading life of an author in our time. To enter this space is to get into the mind of a working writer.
What's there, by the way? We're going to put up the website of the library as we speak. What's around you right now? It's not just what he wrote.
All of Philip Roth's books, and all of his books with marginalia. So that, and I'll give you one example. Behind me, you're not going to be able to see it on the screen, is a book jacket. And the book jacket is of a book called The Nightmare Decade by a Rutgers historian named Fred Cook. It's about the McCarthy era. Well, you've read I Married a Communist. You know the McCarthy era is deeply embedded in that book. So as we opened the book, we saw on the inside of the book jacket, Roth's notes for writing I Married a Communist. When can you get inside a writer's process in that way?
And I also know there was a book written about Roth by the so-called communist he was married to, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, you're laughing because you didn't think I knew that.
I know you know what's up.
And there was a real fun back and forth that some people would say it should be private, but it became very public through this literature. And one book was a really significant book. It was Roth. That's all I'm going to say. Hey, Rosemary, let me ask you this. Tell people right now why they should come to the Newark Public Library, to the Roth Personal Library.
It's unique. It's a way to get under the skin of and inside the mind of one of our era's most important writers. If one fashions oneself a writer, or hopes to be a writer, it's a place to find inspiration, information, solace. There's a lot here for writers to identify with. And all of us are readers. And to see a person read so publicly is thrilling.
Rosemary Steinbaum, trustee of the Newark Public Library, cannot thank you enough. You honor us by your presence and our conversation about an extraordinary author, Philip Roth.
Thank you
Thanks
for
so
having
much.
me, Steve. It's a pleasure.
You got it. I'm Steve Adubato. That is Rosemary Steinbaum. We'll be right back.
State of Affairs with Steve Adubato is a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation. Funding has been provided by PSC&G, Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey, Bank of America, NJM Insurance Group, Summit Health, Johnson & Johnson, New Jersey Sharing Network, the Healthcare Foundation of New Jersey, and by the Fidelco Group. Promotional support provided by Meadowlands Chamber and by New Jersey Globe.
Day after day, we rely on electricity for all the ordinary things in our lives and for the extraordinary.
Mom! Hey, sweetie. How are you? So, tell me about the game.
I scored 2 goals.
That's my boy.
At PSEG, our commitment to you now is more powerful than ever.